This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, Georgia Republicans are now trying to put Fani Willis's job as the Fulton County DA in jeopardy. Can you explain this effort by these state officials?
This is nuts. This is absolutely nuts. So Georgia Republicans pushed through a bill to create essentially a prosecutorial accountability board. And that, by the way, in and of itself is fine, right? Like having accountable prosecutors is a good thing. But they pushed it through in a way that everyone who is appointed to this commission is appointed by a Republican, the governor, the lieutenant governor, legislative leaders. So it's a Republican controlled thing. And that bill, when it goes into effect on October 1st, so after October 1st, there are a bunch of Republicans who say they're going to file a complaint with this new board to go after Willis for enforcing the law, which is the thing that this whole bill was passed to try to have happen,
Right.
which is enforce the law.
Well, I know this is kind of a reductive question, but is this legal? Is this legally sound what they're doing?
It may not be, having nothing to do with Willis, the believed targets of this bill, and this is what makes this so galling. The believed targets of this bill initially were progressive prosecutors who were not bringing enough criminal prosecutions. So the Republicans created this in the legislature to go after criminal justice reform-minded prosecutors who might not be prosecuting certain kinds of low-level offenses. And so a group of them has already sued to block this law from going into effect because they believe it violates separation of powers. It would take away or limit prosecutorial discretion. And so it's not at all clear that this law will ever go into effect, but you can see, Brian, the hypocrisy of this, which is a bill that Republicans put forward to ensure the law is aggressively prosecuted. They are now threatening when it is being used, when the law is being aggressively prosecuted.
Well, if the intent of these Republicans was to go after progressive DAs who weren't prosecuting enough, then will that make their argument in court when this does come before a court? Will that make it more difficult given that Fani Willis is just prosecuting too much now?
Yeah, I think that two things. First, the case that's already been filed, I think is a pretty strong case. I spent some time actually reading the pleadings, and there's a good argument that because of the way the Georgia prosecutor system is structured, that it actually is a violation of separation of power. So I think on the merits, setting aside, Willis and this particular case, I think that the plaintiffs had a pretty strong argument. I think with respect to her, Fani Willis is doing everything she's supposed to do the right way. I mean, she's aggressively prosecuting a law. She worked diligently with the grand jury. She has sought to advance these cases quickly on the docket, right? She's not dawdling in a way that you could say, well, she indicted them and now she doesn't want them to get their day in court. She's aggressively moving on the docket. So I think if ever this complaint was filed and it actually was taken seriously by this new entity, I think it would, any effort to discipline her would run into a buzzsaw in the courts.
Well, Mark, just gaming this out for a moment, if the committee is successful in removing Fani Willis, what happens to the ongoing prosecutions? Does someone else in the office take over, or do the prosecutions go away?
No, the prosecutions don't go away because, I mean, think about this. We're talking about this through the prism of one case, but the Fulton County DA's office is handling thousands and thousands of cases. So those cases don't all, can you imagine the Republican outrage if all of a sudden every case in Fulton County got dismissed? So no, it doesn't go away, which is why you see Republicans also talking about frivolous things like impeachment or trying to defund the office, because this is a flailing attempt that won't succeed at what they're trying to get at.
Well, in theory, wouldn't there just be another prosecutor in that same office who's perfectly aware of the facts surrounding this case, who can just take over and step in Fani Willis's shoes here?
Absolutely. It would just be the number two in the office would step up into the top shoes.
Who they would presumably then try to remove as well, and just on and on.
Right. And this is just rinse and repeat. The thing, though, is that, remember, the this body, even though it will be appointed by all Republicans, it's basically current and former prosecutors, and they're going to provide due process and a hearing. So I don't think this is going to move that quickly. Certainly, I don't think it's going to move by to have any threat of her being removed before the first cases go to trial in late October. But as you point out, like the next person in line, I'm sure would just continue the cases.
And also, there is the added complication that the first speedy trial with Kenneth Chesebro will already be happening during that time when these like partisan clowns are going to be discussing the prospect of removing the prosecutor who is in the midst of a prosecution.
Yeah, and by the way, it may not just be Chesebro, right? Like there are a whole bunch of folks that Willis is seeking to try the entire group together. So you could very well have a circumstance in which you have the trials completed. You could have, if people are convicted, you could have convictions, and this nonsense still be going on.
Now, will the committee have power to end any ongoing criminal prosecutions, or is it just the prosecutors who are in charge of overseeing certain prosecutions?
Yeah, this is really about the prosecutors, right?
Okay.
This is not like a prosecution review panel. That would truly get unwieldy. Again, think about how many cases are prosecuted in this office. It's targeting. The Republican bad motive, and we shouldn't forget that bad motive because it's a different motive, but it's a bad motive, was to target reform-minded prosecutors for removal because they weren't prosecuting enough crime.
Okay.
So certainly the resolution of that would not be to prosecute less crime.
Right. This lawsuit pending right now, is this going through state or federal court? And is there anything to suggest how this move by Georgia Republicans will eventually hold up in that court system?
Yeah, so coincidentally, it is in Fulton County Court. It's in state court. It's in Fulton County. Presumably it'll go through the Fulton County courts and then up through the state court system, potentially to the state Supreme Court. But in the meantime, I expect before we get to October 1st, which is the date that this law really kicks in, it's the date that people can start filing complaints. I expect that there'll be a real push to get the judge to stay or block this law from going into effect while the case is being heard. So it's also possible that this law actually doesn't go into effect on October 1st, and that's something I'm going to be following very closely.
Okay, and finally, what does this say about the state of the Republican Party in Georgia, just more broadly?
Look, what it says about the state of the Republican Party in Georgia is that they're just like the Republican National Committee, and they're just like the state of the Republican Party in Michigan and in Nevada and all the places where you see it's a clown show. People try to act as if somehow the Georgia Republican Party is better than the nonsense we see with Kerry Lake in Arizona or with Tudor Dixon in Michigan. The Republican Party has become a lawless party that is intent on making it harder to vote and easier to cheat, with a principal goal of putting back in the Oval Office an authoritarian who was engaged in supporting insurrection. So that's what they are. And it's really important because it's important that the audience not think that Kemp or Ratzenberger or anything like makes the party anything other than that. Yeah. They support Donald Trump, and they are going to do everything they can do. They're not going to succeed, but they're going to do everything they can do to try to protect him.
Well, that was perfectly put and seems like a good place to end. So with that said, thank you to you and your team for all the work you do to protect democracy from people like this, like these Georgia Republicans. For anybody watching, if you want to help Marc, then please sign up for Democracy Docket. It is the free news outlet that Marc founded to keep you up to date on everything voting and elections. The link is right here on this screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.